You want to know the truth about that morning? I think about it almost every day. Not because of the noise. Everybody remembers the noise. I think about the man in the red tunic who didn't move. That's the part nobody warns you about. That's the part that follows you home. Let me tell it the way it happened, from the start, from before any of us knew. It was a Tuesday in late spring. I remember that because Tuesdays were always slow for me, and I was glad of it. I sold prints near the park railings back then, old maps, soft watercolors of the city, that sort of thing. Tourist stuff. I had a little folding table and a clip stand and a tin box for change, and I'd set up early before the crowds came so I could get the good spot in the shade. The morning was warm but not yet hot. There was that thin gold light you only get for an hour or so, where the buildings look softer than they are and the pigeons seem almost polite. I had a coffee going cold next to the tin box. I remember the steam off it. Small things. You'd be surprised what stays with you. The street was filling up the way it always did. Families with strollers, a school group in matching yellow caps, all holding a rope so they wouldn't scatter. A couple taking photos of each other instead of the city. Two old men feeding the birds and arguing about football. Somewhere a bus hissed and sighed at the curb. It was ordinary. It was the most ordinary morning you can imagine. And there, across from where I'd set up, near the ceremonial post by the gates, stood the guard. Now I'd seen them 100 times. You stop noticing them after a while, if I'm honest. They become part of the furniture of the place, like the lamp posts and the iron fences. The red coat, the tall black bearskin cap that swallows half the face, the boots polished to a shine you could shave in. The rifle held just so. They stand so still that tourists genuinely wonder if they're real, and you'll see kids creep up close and wave a hand in front of them, daring each other, giggling. This one, I learned his name much later, but I'll call him by it now because he earned it. This one was a young lad named Corporal Reuben Mallory. Couldn't have been more than 23. I only knew his age afterwards from the papers. That morning he was just the guard, just the red coat by the gate. But here's the thing I noticed, and I noticed it before anything else happened. I noticed it because I had nothing better to do than watch the street while I waited for a customer. He had an itch. I'm dead serious. That's where the whole story starts for me, not with the bang, with the itch. It was on his face, right along the jaw, just under where the chin strap of that great heavy cap pressed into his skin. You could see it the way you can always see it on someone who's trying not to scratch, that tiny tightening around the eyes, the smallest twitch at the corner of the mouth. His cheek gave the faintest little flinch, like something had landed on it. A fly, maybe. Or just the sweat starting under that hot wool collar and the strap in the warm spring sun. And he did nothing. I mean nothing, not a flicker more than that first twitch. He just let it sit there on his skin, gnawing at him, and he held his face like a man holds his breath underwater. I watched him for, I don't know, a minute, 2 minutes. The itch didn't go away. You could tell. The little muscle by his jaw kept giving that small private shudder, and his eyes, I could just see them under the brim. His eyes got that wet, glassy strain that you get when your whole body is screaming at you to do one small thing, and you simply will not let it. I actually laughed to myself, quietly. I thought, poor lad, I thought I couldn't do it. I'd have given my whole table of prints just to be allowed one good scratch. There's nothing worse, is there? An itch you can't reach. It seems like such a small torture, but it's a real one. It's a stupid, maddening human torture, and there he was, taking it like it was nothing in front of 100 strangers because that was the job. That was the post. You don't move on the post. A little girl from the school group broke off and toddled toward him. Couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. She had ice cream on her chin and a balloon tied to her wrist. She stood right in front of him and stared up at that enormous black cap the way kids do, with her mouth open. He didn't look down at her. Couldn't. But I swear his eyes softened just a hair, the way a person's do when they know a child is near and they want to be gentle but they're not allowed to show it. A teacher hurried over and pulled the girl back, laughing and apologizing to nobody in particular. The balloon bobbed away over the crowd. And still the itch, still he didn't scratch. I want you to hold on to that. Because everything that came after, everything, I understood it through that one small thing I'd already watched him do. A man who would not lift one finger to comfort his own face was not going to be a man who broke. I didn't know that yet, sitting there with my cold coffee. But I'd seen it. I'd seen the proof of it before I knew I'd need it. The morning went on. I sold 2 prints, a watercolor of the river to an American couple, and an old street map to a man who haggled me down and then tipped me anyway, which I never understood but appreciated. The sun climbed. The shade started slipping off my table, and I had to nudge the whole thing back a foot. The school group with the yellow caps drifted off toward the park gates, the rope swaying between them like a long yellow caterpillar. I bought a fresh coffee from the cart down the way. I remember the man at the cart, big fellow, bald, always sweating, always cheerful. He made a joke about the weather. I can't remember what it was. I wish I could. He's one of the things I think about too. Around mid-morning, a van pulled up. I noticed it the way you notice anything that doesn't fit. It wasn't a delivery street really. There were yellow lines and a sign, the kind of spot where you get a ticket inside 10 minutes. But the van pulled in there anyway, half up on the curb, and it just sat. Engine running. White van, no markings, a bit of rust along the bottom of the doors. The kind of van you see 1,000 of and never look at twice. A man got out of the driver's side. Ordinary looking. Gray jacket, baseball cap pulled low, a phone to his ear. He walked off fast around the corner, still talking on the phone, and he didn't come back. The van just sat there with its engine ticking over. I'd like to tell you I knew. I'd like to tell you a chill went up my spine and I felt the wrongness of it in my bones. But that would be a lie, and I promised myself I'd tell this true. I didn't think anything of it. A man parking badly and walking off to make a call, that's London on a Tuesday. I went back to fussing with my prints. The whole thing took maybe 20 seconds of my attention, and then it was gone. The guard, though, Corporal Mallory. I happened to glance back at him a minute later, partly because I wanted to see if the itch had finally beaten him. And it hadn't. His face was still set like stone, still holding against whatever was crawling along his jaw, but his eyes had changed. They weren't soft anymore. They weren't strained from the itch anymore. They were sharp. They were tracking. He was looking at the van. Now you have to understand, these men aren't ornaments, whatever the tourists think. People forget that. They think the stillness is a kind of sleep. It isn't. The stillness is attention. It's a man holding his whole self ready inside a body that isn't allowed to move. And I could see, the way you can see a cat go still in a different way when it spotted a bird, that something had shifted in him. The eyes under that brim moved from the van to the corner where the driver had gone and back to the van. Slow. Careful, measuring. He didn't break his post. Don't misunderstand me. To anyone walking past, he was the same statue he'd been all morning. But I'd been watching him for 2 hours by then, and I knew his stillness now the way you know a friend's quiet. This was a different quiet. A traffic warden came along the row. One of those officials in the high-vis vest with the little machine for printing tickets. She clocked the van right away, the bad parking, the curb. She started toward it, glancing at her machine, ready to do her job. I remember thinking, well, there goes that fellow's morning. He's getting a ticket for sure. And here's the part I've never been able to explain properly to anyone who wasn't there. The guard made a sound. It wasn't a word. Guards on the post don't speak, not casually, not to tourists, not to anyone. But there is a thing they're permitted to do, a kind of sharp, called-out warning, a command voice, drilled into them that cuts through a crowd like a slap. I'd heard it once before, years earlier, when a drunk tourist got too close and tried to knock the cap off a guard's head. That guard had snapped to and bellowed a single word that made the whole street jump. It's startling. It's meant to be. Mallory didn't bellow. Not yet. But he made a low, hard sound in his throat, and his eyes locked onto the warden, and there was something in his face, under the cap, under the strap, under that itch he still hadn't scratched, that made her stop walking. She stopped. She looked at him. He looked at the van, then back at her, then at the van again, telling her, without a word, not that, get away from that. The warden hesitated. People hesitate when something doesn't make sense. She was a tidy woman with a clipboard mind, and a soldier on ceremonial duty staring at a parked van was not on any list she had. For a second I think she was annoyed. For a second I think she was about to wave him off and write her ticket anyway, because that was her job, and his job was to stand still and look pretty for the cameras. And then she didn't. I'll never know exactly what she saw in his face, but she took a step back from the van, just one, and she looked at it properly, the way she hadn't looked at it before: the bad parking, the running engine, the driver gone around the corner and not coming back. That's when the first edge of fear came into the morning. Not loud, just a cold little draft of it, the kind that comes under a door. I felt it without knowing why. I think a few of us did. There's an animal part of a crowd that smells trouble before the thinking part catches up. A couple of people slowed. A mother pulled her child's hand a little tighter. The pigeons, I swear to you, the pigeons lifted all at once and wheeled off over the rooftops, the way they do before a storm. The guard's jaw was tight. His eyes were wide and clear and fixed. And the itch, God help me, I thought of it even then, the itch was still on his face, and he still had not scratched it. I want to slow down here, because this is the moment I keep returning to. The moment before. There's a thing people don't understand about discipline. They think it's about the big tests, the battle, the danger, the dramatic stand. And it can be. But that's not where discipline lives. Discipline lives in the small, stupid, invisible moments when no one is watching and nothing is at stake, and you simply do the hard, dull, correct thing anyway. The unscratched itch. The polished boot at 5 in the morning. The straight back in an empty room. A man who only stands firm when the cameras are on isn't disciplined. He's performing. The real thing is quieter than that and stranger. It's a man who has practiced doing the small correct thing so many thousands of times that when the enormous correct thing finally arrives, his body already knows how to hold. I think that's why I can't shake the itch. Because that morning, before any of us knew what was coming, that young man was already at war. A small, private, ridiculous war against one fly, one bead of sweat, one screaming inch of skin. And he was winning it. Quietly. Alone. For no reward and no audience that cared. Which meant that when the real war arrived, and it was coming, it was 30 seconds away, ticking over inside a rusty white van. He was the one man on that whole street who was ready. The warden was backing away now, fumbling for her radio. A man near the van had noticed her face and started to frown. The cheerful coffee fellow had come around his cart and was squinting down the row. Everything was very normal and very wrong at the same time, the way a room goes wrong in the half-second before the lights cut out. And Corporal Reuben Mallory, 23 years old, an itch on his jaw he would carry to his grave unscratched, drew one slow breath through his nose and got ready to do his job. I didn't know it yet, but the morning I'd thought was the most ordinary I could imagine was about to become the one I'd be telling for the rest of my life. The van sat there, the engine ticked. And then the street went white. The street went white, and then the white turned to sound. That's the wrong way round, I know. You'd think the noise comes first. It doesn't. There was a flash, a flat, enormous, soundless flash, like the whole morning had been a photograph and someone had just taken it, and for one stretched second there was nothing at all. No noise. No air. Just white and a strange pressure on my chest like a hand pushing me back. Then the sound caught up, and the sound was the end of the world. I don't have a word for it. People say bang. It isn't a bang. A bang is something you hear. This was something that happened to you, all the way through, from your teeth to the soles of your feet. It went through the ground and up through my table and through the little tin box of change, and the coins inside it all jumped at once with a bright, stupid jingle that I somehow heard underneath the roar. The blast picked me up off my stool and put me on the pavement. Just like that. One moment sitting, the next on my back with the breath knocked clean out of me and the sky wheeling above me, gray now, full of paper and dust, and a slow drifting confetti of things I didn't want to look at too closely. I couldn't hear. That's the part nobody tells you. After a thing like that, the world goes silent, not quiet silent, a thick cottony nothing in both ears, with a high thin whine underneath it that I would carry for weeks. I lay there in the silence and watched the world move without sound. A woman ran past me with her mouth open, screaming, and I couldn't hear her scream. A car alarm somewhere was flashing its lights and saying nothing. It was like being underwater. It was like a dream where you try to shout and no voice comes. I got up. I don't know how. The body does things the mind hasn't agreed to yet. I got up onto my knees and then onto my feet, swaying, and I turned toward where the van had been. The van wasn't there anymore. Where it had been there was a black scorch on the road and a kind of twisted wreckage and smoke pouring up thick and oily into the spring sky. The railings near it were bent flat. The pavement had a crater in it. People were down all around, some moving, some not, some sitting up clutching their heads with that dazed, betrayed look of someone who can't understand what just happened to the most ordinary morning of their life. The cheerful coffee fellow. His cart was on its side. I looked for him and I couldn't find him, and I made myself stop looking. And through all of it, through the smoke and the silent screaming and the drifting paper, my eyes went, the way they'd gone all morning, to the post by the gate. To the red coat. He was still standing. I want to be careful here, because this is the part people don't believe, and I understand why. It sounds like a story you make up afterwards to feel better. But I was there, and I was looking right at him, and I am telling you exactly what I saw. Corporal Mallory had been closer to the van than I was. Much closer. The blast had hit him full on. His bearskin cap was gone, blown clean off, lying somewhere in the road. Half his red tunic was scorched dark and torn. There was blood down the side of his face, coming from somewhere up by his ear, running in a line down his jaw, down past the very spot, I realized later with a lurch in my stomach, the very spot where the itch had been. He was hurt, badly maybe. I could see it even from where I stood. And he was standing his post. Not lying down, not running, not curled up with his arms over his head the way every animal instinct in a human body screams at you to do when the air itself turns into a weapon. He was on his feet, swaying, bleeding, deafened, his bare head bowed for just a moment, and then, as I watched, he straightened. He pushed himself upright. He set his shoulders. He brought his rifle back across his body, into the position he'd held all morning, the position he'd held 10,000 mornings, and he stood. I'd seen him win a war against an itch, hours before. Now I watched him win a war against the whole of his own terror in front of me, with nothing to gain and his own blood running down his neck. And I understood, all at once, the way you understand a thing in your body before your head can catch up, that these were the same war, that the small one had been training for the large one all along. A man who would not move for an itch was not going to move for a bomb. But here's the thing about Mallory, and this is what made it more than just a statue refusing to fall. He didn't only stand. He looked. His head turned, slow and deliberate, sweeping the smoke, and I realized he wasn't just enduring. He was assessing. The soldier underneath the ceremony had woken all the way up, and it was doing the thing soldiers are made for. The thing the rest of us couldn't do because we were too busy being afraid. It was looking for the next danger, and it was looking for who needed help. There was a second van. I hadn't seen it. None of us had. But Mallory had, or he'd guessed it the way he'd guessed the first one, with that animal certainty that had made the traffic warden step back. Down the row, half hidden by the smoke, there was another vehicle and a figure moving near it, low and fast, in a gray jacket and a baseball cap pulled down low. The driver, the man who'd walked off around the corner, he'd come back, and he was moving toward the crowd of stunned, bleeding, helpless people sprawled across the pavement, toward the school group, toward the yellow caps scattered now across the ground like fallen leaves, toward the little girl with the balloon who was sitting up in the middle of it all, crying, alone. And Mallory moved. For the first time all morning, for the first time I'd bet in his entire ceremonial career, he broke his post on purpose. But not the way fear breaks a man. He didn't run from. He ran toward. He came off that spot like something released, like a held breath finally let go, and he went straight at the man in the gray jacket, across the broken ground, through the smoke, bleeding, deafened, swaying with his rifle up and his torn red coat flaring behind him. And he found his voice. That command voice, the drilled one, the one that cuts a crowd like a slap. I couldn't hear it. My ears were still full of cotton and that high, thin whine. But I saw it. I saw his whole body throw it. I saw the cord stand out in his bloody neck and his mouth open wide and the shape of the word on his lips, huge and hard and absolute, and I saw the man in the gray jacket freeze. Everyone froze. Even deaf, even half-dead, that voice reached into the chaos and grabbed it by the collar. The girl stopped crying. People who had been crawling stopped crawling and turned. For 1 second, in the middle of the worst thing any of us had ever seen, there was a young man in a ruined red coat, bareheaded and bleeding, standing between 100 broken strangers and the thing that wanted to break them more, and he was not afraid. Or he was. He must have been. But he stood in front of it anyway, which is the only kind of courage that means anything. The kind that's afraid and stays. The man in the gray jacket ran. I'll be honest, I think he ran because of the voice. I think a part of him had counted on a street full of statues and screaming and no one able to stop him, and instead a dead-eyed soldier had risen out of his own wreckage and come at him like the wrath of God, and it broke something in his nerve. He bolted. He left the second van and he ran, and Mallory went a few steps after him and then stopped, because there were 100 people on the ground behind him and one coward fleeing in front of him, and he made the choice a good man makes. He let the runner go. He turned back to the hurt. The second van never went off. They found out later why. The papers had all the technical reasons, the things that failed, the wires that didn't connect. I don't care about the wires. I care that a man in a red coat stood up out of a bomb and made the second one not matter, because the only person who could have set it off close-up had just been frightened off his own evil by a boy with no helmet and a voice like the last trumpet. I made my way toward him. I don't know why. I had nothing to offer. I'm not a doctor. I'm a man who sells prints, but you go toward a thing like that, the way you'd go toward a fire to pull someone out. The silence was starting to break apart in my ears now, sound leaking back in around the edges of the whine. Sirens far off and getting closer. A child wailing. A man calling a name over and over and over. Mallory had reached the little girl. The one with the balloon. The one who'd stood under his cap that morning with ice cream on her chin while he wasn't allowed to look down at her. He was looking down at her now. He'd gone to one knee in front of her, that proud, drilled body folded right down to her level in the dirt and the broken glass, and he had his torn red sleeve around her, and he was saying something to her, close, gentle, his bloody face right next to her small, frightened one. I couldn't hear what. I didn't need to. I could see it. I could see the same softness I'd glimpsed that morning under the brim of the cap. The gentleness he hadn't been allowed to show, he was allowed now. And he was spending all of it on this one crying child, shielding her with his own body, telling her whatever a person tells a child to make the world stop ending. She stopped crying. That's the image I have. Out of the whole terrible morning, that's the one that's burned in. Not the flash, not the crater, not the smoke. A young guardsman with no helmet and blood on his jaw, kneeling in the ruin of an ordinary Tuesday with a little girl's face pressed into his ruined red coat, and her balloon somehow, impossibly, still tied to her wrist, bobbing over the both of them in the smoke, bright and round and ridiculous and alive. The sirens were close now. The first responders were coming over the rubble in their bright jackets. Hands were reaching for the hurt. The morning, which had ended, was beginning the long, slow work of becoming something survivable. And Corporal Reuben Mallory knelt in the middle of it and held a stranger's child and did not let go. They took him away on a stretcher in the end. He didn't want to go. I saw that too. The medics reached him while he was still kneeling with the girl, and they tried to take her from him. Gently, the way they're trained, because a child needs checking over and a wounded man needs to lie down. And he wouldn't give her up. Not at first. There was a moment, small and strange in the middle of all that noise, where two paramedics in green were crouched beside a bleeding soldier, and the soldier was shaking his head, keeping his arm where it was around the child, until a woman came running through the wreckage screaming a name. And it was the girl's name. It was her mother, and only then did Mallory let go. He watched the mother fold the child up into her arms. He watched the balloon bob away over their heads. And then, only then, he let himself be a wounded man. He sat back on the broken pavement, and the strength went out of him all at once, the way it does when a body has been running on pure will, and the will finally lets it rest. The medics caught him before his head hit the ground. I remember his face as they lifted the stretcher. The blood had been wiped back from his eyes. He was gray and slack and far away. And his eyes, those eyes I'd watched all morning, sharp under the brim, soft at the child, fierce at the runner, his eyes were just tired now. Just a tired young man being carried away from the worst morning of his life. His hand, though, his hand came up off the stretcher, slow, shaking, and it went to his jaw. To that spot. And he scratched it. I watched him do it. After everything, after the itch he'd held all morning like a soldier holding a line, through the heat and the strap and the 100 starring strangers, through a bomb that tore the day in half, he finally lifted one finger and scratched the side of his own face. Just once. A small, slow, human scratch. And his eyes closed and something in his face eased, the tiniest bit, the way a face eases when one small, unbearable thing is finally allowed to end. I don't know why that broke me. Out of the whole morning, that's the thing that put me on my knees in the road with my hands over my mouth. Not the flash, not the crater, the scratch. A man who had not let himself have that one small mercy until the job was done, until the danger was gone and the child was safe and the runner was fled. He'd held the line on everything, the enormous and the ridiculous both, and only when he could finally afford to be just a person again did he let himself be one. Then they carried him through the smoke and the sirens, and he was gone. The street after, I'll never forget what the street became. It became the best of people. I know that sounds wrong to say about a morning like that, but it's true and I won't pretend otherwise. Within minutes, the same ordinary strangers who'd been knocked flat were up and helping. The man who'd haggled me down over a map was on his knees pressing his own jacket to someone's leg. The two old football men were carrying a third between them. The schoolteacher in the yellow caps had gathered her scattered children into a tight, frightened knot against a wall and was counting them, over and over, her voice cracking 1, 2, 3, her hands shaking too hard to point. The traffic warden, the one Mallory had stopped with a look, was directing the ambulances in. She dropped her clipboard and her little ticket machine somewhere in the blast, and she was standing in the middle of the road waving the green trucks through, and there were tears running clean down her face the whole time, and she never once stopped working. I think she knew. I think she knew what his look had bought her, those few seconds, that one step back. I never learned her name. I hope she's all right. I think about her too. The sirens kept coming and coming. The whole city seemed to be pouring toward us every kind of help there is, blue lights and green and a long, terrible line of them stretching back down the road. They cordoned it off. They moved us back. A woman in a high-vis jacket put a foil blanket round my shoulders, the crinkly silver kind, and asked me if I was hurt, and I said no, and I wasn't, not really, not in any way you could see. I sat on the curb a long while with that foil blanket on my shoulders and watched them work. My table was gone. My prints were scattered all down the street, watercolors of a river, an old street map soaking up the dust. I didn't go and get them. They didn't matter. Nothing on that table had ever mattered, and I think I only understood it that morning. I found out the rest from the papers, like everyone else. His name, his age, 23, like I said. They printed his picture, the official one, in full dress, the bearskin cap on straight and his face set in that ceremonial blankness, and it was strange to see it because it was him and it wasn't. It was the statue and not the man. The man I'd seen had no cap and blood on his jaw and a child in his arms. The man I'd seen was more. He lived. That's the thing I need you to know, because I left him on a stretcher and I know your heart's been bracing. He lived. He was hurt, burns, a perforated eardrum, shrapnel they had to dig out of his shoulder. The ear that bled was never quite the same. But he lived. They patched him up, and in time he healed mostly, the way people do, on the outside at least. There was a medal eventually. There was a ceremony, a quieter one, indoors, the kind they do for these things, and they pinned something on his chest and said words about valor and read out what he'd done. The standing, the voice, the runner turned back, the girl. He stood very straight for it, the papers said. Of course he did. Standing straight was the one thing that man could always do. And the little girl with the balloon, they tracked her down for a story a year on. She was fine. She didn't remember much, they said, which is a mercy, but her mother remembered. Her mother said one thing that I cut out and kept, and I'll tell it to you the way I remember it, in my own words, because it stayed with me. She said that in the worst moment of her life, when she thought she'd lost her child, the last thing she saw before the smoke took everything was a soldier in a red coat going down, not falling down, but kneeling down, to put himself around her little girl. She said she'd spent her whole life being told those guards weren't allowed to move. And the one time it mattered, the one time in the whole wide world it mattered, this one moved. I think about discipline differently now. Before that morning, if you'd asked me, I'd have said discipline was a hard thing, a cold thing, a clenched fist of a thing, all those rules, all that not moving, all that polish and starch and standing still while children waved their hands in your face. I'd have said it was the opposite of being human, that it was a man making himself into a statue. I don't think that anymore. I think discipline is the most human thing there is, and I think it's made of love, even when it looks like the opposite. Because what is it really, all that standing still? All that holding of the line against the itch and the heat and the staring strangers? It's a man practicing, every dull, ordinary day, the one thing he'll need when the day is no longer ordinary. It's a promise made to people he hasn't met yet. Stand here. Hold this. So that when the worst comes, and it came on the most ordinary Tuesday you can imagine, you'll already know how to stay. He held the line against an itch so that he could hold the line against a bomb. And he held the line against the bomb so that a little girl could grow up. That's the whole of it. That's the whole chain, link by link, from the smallest stupid thing to the largest thing there is. It all runs through the same man, standing in the same red coat, refusing to move. I went back to that spot once, a long time after. They'd cleaned it all up by then. New railings, new pavement, no scorch, no crater, nothing to say what had happened there. A guard was on the post again, a different one, a stranger, standing in the sun with his rifle held just so, still as a statue, while tourists took his picture and a child crept up to wave a hand in front of his face. And I stood across the street, where my table used to be, and I watched him for a long time. And after a while I saw it, that tiny tightening around the eyes, that small private flinch at the corner of the mouth, an itch on his jaw in the warm sun, and him doing nothing about it, holding the line on a thing so small that no one in that whole crowd even saw it but me. I wanted to walk over to him. I wanted to tell him I knew what it cost. I wanted to tell him about a Tuesday and a white van and a balloon and a man who scratched his own face only after he'd saved 100 strangers. But you can't, can you? You don't speak to them. They don't speak to you. So I just stood there, an old man with wet eyes, and I let him do his job. Because now I know what that stillness is. Now I know what it's for. So the next time you walk past one of them, red coat, tall black cap, still as a statue in the sun, and you think to yourself what a strange, stiff, pointless thing to stand like that, to never move, to not even scratch an itch. Stop. And remember that somewhere, on some ordinary morning, the line that man is practicing to hold might be the only thing standing between a bomb and a little girl with a balloon. That's why he doesn't scratch.